So let's get to Chris Ramirez and Tessa Mentis. They're following all of this for us from the Roundhouse. And guys, the question today really is, what is this even going to look like? Are lawmakers just picking up where they left off?
Well, that's actually a really good question, Grace.
That is.
I'll pick it up. What this is going to look like is almost a very shortened version of a regular session. So we know that here in the next few seconds or minutes, both the House and the Senate will gavel in, and then they're going to assign the different bills to different committees. So for the rest of the afternoon, we're going to see these bills regarding legalizing marijuana, some public safety bills around marijuana be debated, and we probably won't see the full House or the full Senate meet again, at least until late this evening, maybe even possibly tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I think a lot of, I mean, this is our third special session in a year's time. What's different here is when we came back the prior two times, we kind of had a good roadmap of where we were going. It was to resort out the budget because of COVID. It was to figure out how to spend the COVID money coming from the federal government. So we were in and out in basically a day's time. As Chris mentioned, that's not going to be the case here, because while we're here to focus on one job, which is potentially legalizing recreational marijuana, there are many, many different opinions as to how we should do that amongst our lawmakers. Chris mentioned that we are going to see some public safety bills directly tied to legalizing cannabis introduced, but those are probably not really even going to get out of their committee process. These are going to be sponsored by Republicans. So, and I'm going to be working on the Republican angle of where we go through this special session today. And so, you know, I think a lot of people, when they see video from the Roundhouse, it's when we get to those floor sessions, when we have lawmakers in both chambers hashing it out. Those processes are going to be even longer now, Chris, because that's the only way that a lot of Republicans feel they're going to be able to get their input into this legislation by making floor amendments, and floor amendments take a lot of time.
Right, they require a lot of debate. I think, Grace and viewers at home, to sort of generalize the sentiment, or if we're reading the room accurately, I think there's a large okay with the idea of legalizing cannabis. Polling has shown that New Mexicans, generally speaking, are okay with it. What a handful of lawmakers and a handful of advocates are saying is that if we legalize recreational marijuana, there are some other factors that we need to consider. Public safety, child welfare, and making sure businesses can enforce a drug-free work environment are just some of those things. And so what we're going to see today is that push and tug, that struggle to make sure that when we are adopting the Cannabis Regulation Act, we're also adopting the full plate of laws that accompany it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is not a, yes, recreational marijuana is going to bring in millions upon millions, check the box, let's go. This is legalizing cannabis. I'm not saying, this is nothing new for anybody at home, comes with a lot of different issues that come with it. So I think I say this every first day, buckle up, because it's going to be a bumpy ride.
As we let you go, and we'll come back and we'll revisit at 12:30, this is not going to be a fast process because, as Tessa mentioned, deals are not in place. This is not an issue where everybody has agreement on. There is not consensus. And so a lot of the time that's going to be spent during the special session will be debating the fundamentals of how we appropriately move forward with legalizing cannabis, and that's something that's going to take time. So we will be here for the long haul, all day, all night, and certainly into tomorrow.
Essentially, we're really focusing on three major bills in this special session. Two are coming from the Senate, but the main one everybody's talking about tonight, of course, is House Bill 2. That's our newest version of the Cannabis Regulation Act. It's been assigned to House committees so far today, so if it survives both of those, we could see this thing go for a full House vote as early as tomorrow morning. Kai Porter is going to get into the weeds, so to speak, on that legislation coming up in a little bit. But I do want to talk about those other bills that are part of the special session that could impact a lot of what happens here in New Mexico. One of them goes hand in hand with legalizing recreational marijuana. That would be Senate Bill 2. Essentially, this legislation would get rid of some New Mexicans' criminal records if they were tied to marijuana convictions. That's a really passionate debate that we're seeing go down in a Senate committee right now. That effort was actually tied in to the pot bill during our past 60-day legislative session. But this time around, for some reason, lawmakers decided to make those two issues separate, so we'll see how that decision pans out for them. Finally, Senate Bill 1, expanding our Local Economic Development Act, or LEDA is how we usually refer to it. Basically, to make this understandable, it would be moving around money to try and attract more big business to take advantage of that act and then set up shop here in New Mexico. So this is really important. The same process goes down for the special session as with any other session that we see, just like we had with the 60-day session. So for example, we can't take any shortcuts. We can't basically take the bill to legalize recreational marijuana that we talked about during the 60-day and just pick up right where we left off. No, 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 no. Back to square one. If the bills pass committees, then they would go to their full House or Senate vote, wherever the bill was introduced. At that point, what can happen and what will happen from what we've heard from lawmakers is they're going to make amendments, or they're going to suggest changes go into that legislation. When that starts happening, that's when we can really get into those long, drawn-out, sometimes very passionate and frustrating debates that lead into those late-night sessions that, frankly, none of us really like here on the KOB4 team, because we do like to get sleep every now and again. If they make it that far and they pass that first floor vote, that's the halfway point, because then they have to go to the other chamber and go through all the committees and go through that vote and see if they survive that battle. So we are in for a long haul. Point being, don't expect anything to be set in stone on anything in the near future, friends, just being honest with you. So with that, I want to get to the reason that most of you care about what we're talking about tonight. Again, the effort to legalize recreational marijuana in our state. Kai Porter spoke to the bill's sponsor earlier today. And Kai, a lot of people are wondering, you know, it didn't make it through the 60-day session. People on both sides of the political aisle had some issues. So how many changes are we seeing to this version compared to what we saw in the 60-day? All right, Kai, thank you very much. And I'm glad that Kai brought up public safety, because many lawmakers are arguing right now that this marijuana bill isn't complete, specifically because they believe there are some missing components when it comes to keeping people safe if we make this move. So I want to bring in Chris Ramirez on this one. Chris, essentially, I would say the main concern here is the drugged driving concept.
Yeah, and if I'm hearing the concerns correctly, we know that legalizing marijuana is very popular. We know, and most people buy into the argument that it will create thousands of jobs. It starts a new industry. However, we're hearing lawmakers make the argument that legalizing cannabis must also come with a set of public safety laws to make sure that we are preventing drugged driving and also holding drugged drivers accountable.
We have to deal with drug driving. As we all know, New Mexico is in the top of the drug driving states.
Knowing that legalizing recreational marijuana is likely just around the corner for New Mexico, State Representative Bill Rehm is proposing laws that essentially sets up the framework on preventing and prosecuting drugged driving.
And I think that we should be looking at the public safety aspect.
One bill addresses a problem prosecutors face right now. New Mexico has no metric to determine a legal limit for drugged driving. We all know that when it comes to drinking and driving, the blood alcohol content can't be 0.08 or greater. Well, this bill establishes a similar metric for driving while under the influence of cannabis.
If you look at Colorado, Washington State, Oregon, they use 5 nanograms as their standard. If you go to Arizona, it's any quantity. So I use the 5 nanograms, and I agree there's not a lot of science around it. It is, but this is the level that everybody seems to begin with.
Representative Ream is also proposing a bill that allows law enforcement to get a warrant to draw blood anytime a person is suspected of driving while under the influence.
New Mexico does not allow a search warrant for DWI first, second, and third offense.
The change in the law would allow for blood draws for any offense, not just the ones after the third.
The only way to determine if an individual has drugs in their system is by a blood test. So all of those people are walking. And as I said in the committee, if you're going to have recreational marijuana, you have to pass this bill to allow officers to do blood tests.
A legislative study revealed in 2018 about 90% of the blood drawn from suspected drunk drivers showed they were positive for other drugs. Ream believes law enforcement and courts need the tools in the form of new laws to protect New Mexicans from impaired drivers. So about these bills, Representative Ream actually introduced these exact same bills in the regular session. They died immediately. They went nowhere. So what he plans to do is bring them into the special session. That hasn't formally been done yet. He's going to have to wait until the House meets again, which probably, as you mentioned earlier, won't be until tomorrow morning. But he's really making the case that if we're going to consider legalizing cannabis, we also need to make sure that we're putting together, Tessa, the framework of public safety to protect New Mexicans from impaired drivers.
Yeah, at least the bench work for it.
Absolutely.
So that we can make improvements. Okay, Chris, thank you very much. So that's the story of what's happening here right now in the Roundhouse. I mean, it could completely change when we join you at 6, or we could be right at the same point we are right now. But I mean, that's the beauty of the Roundhouse, right? You never know. Essentially, when the committees are holding the cards, which they are right now. But we've got you covered either way, so you know what is happening here at the Roundhouse and how it could impact you and everybody in your house, friends. For now, we're going to send it back to Tommy in Albuquerque.
How's everything going?
How's everything going? Well, to give you any indication of that, the easiest bill every single session, whether it's a 30, a 60-day, a special, a surefire thing that's going to get passed, is the feed bill. Chris knows what I'm talking about. I mean, basically, this is a bill that is simple. It outlines how we're going to pay for the session, how we're going to get everything done. The feed bill was just tabled in its first committee today. So again, that should give you an indication of how things are going so far, because if we can't even agree on how we're going to pay to do the people's business, we're going to have to get ready for a much bumpier ride when we get into talking about legalizing recreational marijuana. Now, there is a reason that feed bill died, and I'm going to get into that in just a little bit for you. But it's still a sign our lawmakers are not going into this session as agreeable as maybe they thought when they woke up this morning. And again, this is their third special session that they're handling in just a year's time. Usually, we're really looking at, two sides of a debate with some really controversial legislation. The Democrats have their arguments, Republicans have their arguments. Not really the case when it comes to cannabis. We're seeing a lot of disagreements within those parties, especially when it comes to Democrats. And while there are some changes to the version of the marijuana bill that we saw during the 60-day session compared to the new one that has just been introduced today, I spoke to Republicans in both the Senate and the House today. They tell me no Democratic sponsors of this bill reached out, asked for their input, and overall they just believe that we're really rushing this one through.
I get it. It's an issue that we need to work through. I think we can and will get a better bill if we work closely with each other, vetting the circumstances out, not taking a 0.5 version from the governor that comes down 30 minutes before the session starts and says this is the bill you're going to pass. Not going to happen. Not with my vote.
I told you, it's already getting a little hairy out there. Back to that feed bill I mentioned really quickly. Again, run-of-the-mill legislation that outlines how we're going to pay for a special session. This one was different. and that's why it got tabled today. This feed bill included some money that would be tied to legalizing recreational marijuana. Some lawmakers on the House Appropriations Committee looked at that bill today, didn't like how things were shaking out, and ultimately it's tabled. So that means we got to go back to the drawing board, make some changes to get some kind of legislation passed so we can continue the business for this special session. So that's where we stand at that point. There is no telling how long this special session could last. I can tell you that if you had your money on it ending today, go ahead and pay up, because that's not going to happen one bit. We are absolutely already making plans on going into tomorrow. With that, let's get to the main reason all of us are up here, including our lawmakers. Kai Porter has been following House Bill 2. That's our new marijuana bill for this special session. Kai, that bill was put into 2 committees today, so are we making any progress so far on that? All right, Kai, thank you very much for that update. So needless to say, there are definitely some unresolved issues with this bill. Lawmakers specifically believe that if we do legalize recreational cannabis in our state, we've got to put some safeguards in place to protect New Mexicans, specifically children. I want to bring in Chris Ramirez for that part of the story, Chris.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of community advocates and there are a lot of lawmakers in this building that wish we were having that conversation right now in this very moment. They just believe that the Cannabis Regulation Act, as it stands now, despite what you heard in Kai's story, that it just doesn't go far enough, especially to protect children.
What really sparked my interest in this particular bill is I currently have a number of kids who have tested positive for cannabis, young children, ages 2 to 5 years old, who have tested positive. And we don't have the framework to protect these kids.
Family law attorney Antonia Roybal-Mack argues now is the time for lawmakers to protect children. She's concerned about language in the Cannabis Regulation Act that actually prevents the state from stepping in if a parent is harming or abusing a child while under the influence of cannabis.
It prevents law enforcement, it prevents Children, Youth, and Families Department, it prevents judges, anybody from protecting a child if the neglect is based upon cannabis use. And we need to make that akin to alcohol use, where at the end of the day, regulating cannabis is important, but we need to look at this as what do children need and how do we protect them?
The social justice advocates will say we need to make sure that we're not penalizing and we're not criminalizing cannabis use. And so if we are forcefully removing children out of a home environment because of the cannabis use, that sort of goes against the social justice intentions of this bill. To that, how would you argue that point?
The same as with alcohol. If you have a parent who's drinking too much alcohol, who's driving with a child in the vehicle because of alcohol use, who's not getting that child to school because of alcohol use, is abusing that child because of alcohol use and otherwise creating a neglectful environment for a little kid that can't protect himself, at that moment, the police, CYFD, the judges, family law lawyers can go in and protect that child. So it's not penalizing them. It's saying, if you want to go, consume cannabis, that's okay. But if you consume it in a way that's going to put a child in danger, that's no longer okay.
The New Mexico legislature is not addressing consumer laws to regulate the marketing and packaging of edible marijuana products that could easily be confused for a baked good or a piece of candy.
The packaging should be mandated not to be attractive to children. If you're an adult and you go in and you want to buy gummies, that's great. You know what they are and you know what's in the package. But there should not be characters, any of those sort of things on the packaging to make it attractive to a child.
Tess and you and I were talking about this earlier. Up until this morning, and this is no joke, up until this morning, a prior version of the Cannabis Regulation Act allowed children to have up to 6 cannabis plants. People were outraged. It got taken out of the bill. So these are just some of the concerns about children that people have been raising. Colorado made some mistakes early on. They legalized recreational marijuana, as we know, and then they later discovered that kids were inadvertently getting into those edibles and then becoming intoxicated. So what the Colorado legislature had to do was eventually play catch up, and they created state laws around marketing and around packaging. And I think if I'm if I'm hearing the concerns correctly, the concerns are other states have made these kinds of rookie mistakes. New Mexico doesn't have to make rookie mistakes. There are other lessons from other states that we can be learning from. And I think what we're hearing from the advocates is that New Mexico legislators ought to do a little bit of a deep dive into what worked and what didn't work in those other states, so that we're not inventing a wheel that, quite frankly, other states have already invented and are now rolling down the road.
Yeah, for sure. We do have a benefit in getting to this a little later than everybody else.
Exactly.
You would assume.
We don't need to be making rookie mistakes because other states have already made them for us.
Absolutely. Okay. So, Chris, I know that if one of these bills does pass, it's still going to be a while, though, right, before we would, just be able to walk into a dispensary.
Yeah, so we are not even looking at legalizing until at least April 2022. So we are not looking at any kind of sales until at least 1 year down the road.
And if House Bill 2, for example, the one that Kai talked about, the one in this special passes, that would create what's called a cannabis control division, and those folks would be in charge of regulating and designing rules for every step of this process. I mean, from growing the plants to how many items could be stocked on shelves at one time. It would also go into the health, the safety, testing requirements, if you will. Nathan O'Neill is going to be taking a much closer look at that. Coming up, he's going to be breaking it down all for you in just a few minutes, and we will join you back then as well. Tommy.
Tessa, thank you. And Tessa, the two parties are, of course, disagreeing on aspects of this, but the disagreement runs even deeper than that.
Yeah, they absolutely do, Tommy. I mean, sure, you still have your partisan arguments and your debates. That's always going to happen in politics. But we're absolutely seeing some divisions within the parties, too, because, I mean, we're talking about legalizing recreational marijuana here. There's a lot of opinions about what's going to work, what's not going to work, and maybe what has to be laid out now instead of something that we could maybe fix a year or two down the line. So with all of that said, as we know, our lawmakers are debating it right now. The version that we're going to have moving forward to get this effort done is House Bill 2. Kai Porter has been following that progress of this legislation all day, so let's get to him with an update on where that stands tonight. Kai. Okay. Kai, thank you for that update. And in the same vein, lawmakers are arguing there are some other things that we need to check off the list, I should say, if we're going to legalize recreational cannabis. For one, lawmakers want to make sure that we can keep drugged drivers off our roads, and also make sure that businesses can still have a way to enforce drug-free workplaces. Christian Meirelles has been working on those issues today in this very big debate, Chris. So where do we stand on those efforts?
Yeah, I think if we're hearing the concerns, we know that the concerns largely stem around the fact that the Cannabis Regulation Act doesn't really address public safety in a real meaningful way. Republican State Senator Bill Rehm plans on introducing a package of bills tomorrow morning that aims to create a framework of keeping our roads safe in an age where it's very possible we're going to see more New Mexicans driving while impaired on our roads. Here's what that looks like. One bill allows police officers to obtain a search warrant to draw blood from any suspected impaired driver. Right now, New Mexico law only allows for a warrant if that person has already been convicted of 3 DWIs. The second bill allows blood draw technicians to appear virtually in court as expert witnesses. Most of the technicians work in Albuquerque, but as you know, we have cases all around the state that require their testimony. And the third bill creates a metric to measure and establish a legal limit of cannabis in the system. For alcohol, we know that the legal driving limit is 0.08. Well, a lot of lawmakers feel like we need some similar metric for cannabis, or how else can we successfully hold drugged drivers accountable? And then there are the concerns that we're hearing from the business community.
Well, one of our top concerns will be to look in that bill to be sure that there is language which is explicit about allowing a business to practice their drug-free policy programs within their businesses. So that's one. And the second related issue that you spoke to a bit deals with the federal government. This drug is still illegal on a federal level. And we have many businesses in Albuquerque and in New Mexico who have contracts with the federal government, whether it's Sandia or any number of other laboratories or federal facilities. So the language in the bill should also be explicit, which allows them to pursue their contracts in a drug-free workplace.
So, Tess, I think what we've seen, there's a variety of people in a variety of fields who just feel like a little bit more work needs to be done so that New Mexico has a more complete and a more whole framework for legalizing cannabis. Certainly, these are the concerns that we're expecting lawmakers to grapple with and to deal with during this special session.
Yeah, and with all of that said, there is some progress. As we know, as Kai pointed out earlier, the Cannabis Regulation Act, House Bill 2, that's what we're going to be calling it for these next few days, has already passed its first House committee. We're going to see if that progress continues through the night. Of course, we are in our third special session for a year's time, and a lot is going to still happen. It will continue tonight. We don't know exactly for how long, but we know we're going to be back here again early in the morning. We're hearing that it could be on the House floor as soon as tomorrow morning, of course, if it survives the remaining committees that it has to go through. A lot could happen between now and the night beat at 10 o'clock. Of course, we're going to be back at it again a little later here in the 6:30, actually talking to some of our lawmakers who are part of the teams trying to get their voices heard on this issue. That's coming up a little later, and of course, we'll have the latest for you tonight at 10 on KOB4 Night Beat. Back to you guys in Albuquerque. Now, that is where the bill is, as you had pointed out, and I want to go through what's happening because there was an amendment that got a rather interesting reaction that I want to explain to everybody, because we have had viewers question us about this part of pushing recreational marijuana through our legislature. So this was introduced by Republican State Senator Stuart Engel. It would prohibit any New Mexico lawmaker from applying for a license to sell recreational cannabis until 2026. There has been some chatter, as I said, about the potential conflict of interest that we're seeing with this issue. Some lawmakers have wondered if any of their colleagues had a financial interest or a financial stake in pushing through the legalization of recreational marijuana. So that amendment came up in the Senate committee as a whole. I'm going to let Kai Porter explain to you what that actually means, because basically the Senate has decided they're going to do this thing because they want to streamline this bill, House Bill 2, the Cannabis Regulation Act, while it's on their side of the chamber, so that hopefully we're not going into these really early morning debates that we saw during the 60-day legislative session. Let's go back to that amendment I talked about. So it did get quite a bit of passionate reaction. In fact, one of the bill sponsors from the House who was answering questions in the Senate committee as a whole had said that it was a very unfriendly amendment. In fact, he said that it was unlike any amendment he had ever seen for legalizing recreational marijuana. With that, though, the amendment did pass on a 25-17 vote. It's not going to be the end of these talks, as we know. I mean, if you followed a second of our legislation process, this is not an easy thing. We're expecting HB2 to be going through the Senate for a very, very long time tonight. Chris Ramirez and I were actually talking about whether or not we're going to see a vote this evening. So that's what we're trying to kind of gauge the timeline so that everybody at home can know what to expect. I do want to bring in Kai Porter at this point to update us on what we saw with House Bill 2 today, the Cannabis Regulation Act. It did pass the House earlier today. Again, it is in the Senate right now. Kai, if you can walk us through what we saw today and what the Senate is doing to try and get this pushed through sooner, faster tonight. All right, Kai, thank you very much. So we have talked about how Republicans and other advocates have really said that if we do legalize cannabis, we need to have a set of public safety laws to go along with it, because, for example, as it stands, we don't have a way to really test or find drugged drivers if this legislation goes through. As you know, Chris Ramirez has been following this really closely. And Chris, I mean, you literally watched that effort crash and burn in what, like 20 minutes today?
Yeah, you and I are always complaining, right? Because we sit through these super long debates. And this was not one of them.
No.
Literally in 20 minutes, lawmakers decided that the public safety package was not germane to the proclamation that the governor put out. To put that in more plain English, there's a state law that basically requires in a special session any bills that lawmakers debate or talk about have to immediately relate or have to immediately be close to what the governor wants lawmakers to do here in the special session. And so they decided that public safety about cannabis is not germane to what the governor wanted them to do here. Take a look.
So the question on the table is whether we recommend to the body to consider this bill germane and therefore be part of the committee assignments to a standing committee.
In the shortest debate of the special session, just like that.
Thank you, members of the committee. We stand adjourned.
House Bill 4, a package of ideas to bolster our state's DWI laws to encompass cannabis, died.
What is most troubling with this is that we're in the process of passing legalized marijuana, but we're not giving law enforcement the tools to deal with the drug driving.
State Representative Bill Rehm is the sponsor of the public safety package. House Bill 4 would have allowed blood sampling technicians to appear virtually to testify in criminal court cases. They all work in Albuquerque and can't always drive to courthouses around the state for court. It would have created a legal metric to measure cannabis in a suspected impaired driver's system. Much like how the legal limit for drinking and driving is .08, Representative Rehm believes New Mexico needs to establish a legal driving while impaired with cannabis limit to hold drug drivers accountable. And it would have allowed police officers to get a warrant to draw blood anytime they suspected impaired driving. Right now, New Mexico law only allows for blood draws if that suspect has already had 3 prior DWI convictions. So this isn't the end of the road for Representative Rehm. He says that even though he's going to have to wait almost a year, he does want to reintroduce these ideas in the 2022 regular session. It's a 30-day session. It could be possible that these ideas get a little bit more traction. So essentially what that means for us is there's a good chance that this legislature will pass legalized recreational marijuana. It's just not going to have all of those public safety safeguards in place to accompany our new industry that's most likely going to happen.
Yeah, okay. Chris, thank you very much. And I mean, there are other bills obviously making their way through the Senate, through the House at this point. But again, we want to stress to you that marijuana, it is all down to the Senate at this point where, again, it failed during our last legislative session. So this is where, you know, we kind of knew it was going to pass the House. The Senate, that's still up in the air, so we're monitoring everything. Our team's going to be here for all of that. As you know, when we join you back here at 6, it could be more of the same. It could be a completely different situation. That's just how New Mexico's roundhouse goes, I suggest. So no matter what, folks, our team coverage will continue at 6. So, Tommy, back to you.
Thank you, guys.
We're definitely seeing stuff happening here, but I just want to remind everybody, you know, this is going to take a while. State senators have the cannabis bill in their control at this point. We are hearing them go into some very lengthy and intricate debates and discussions about this, and they're changing up the way they're handling this at this point compared to what we saw in the 60-day session. Right now, the Senate is in what we're calling the committee as a whole. So typically when we get into legislation, we tell you, you know, it's in Senate Judiciary, and then that has to do something, and then it might go to Senate Finance. We're not doing anything consecutively with the committee as a whole. Now, all the committee members are there in the Senate chambers, and they're trying to really start putting their questions out now to streamline this process. It's one of those things, you know, do we want to spend all of our effort early on in the process, or do we want to spend it later in the process, and the Senate for this special session has decided they want to try and get all of this debate, all of these questions out of the way early. But as we know, friends, early can become late, first can become last very quickly in all of this, because this is a very hefty bill that they have to hash out. Just earlier ago, we saw Republican State Senator Cliff Purtle asking a lot of questions about the Cannabis Regulation Act. Back in the 60-day session, we had showed you he walked in with his big box of amendments. The big box was back. He just wrapped up his 45-minute session asking questions about 15 minutes ago, and now we are seeing another senator just firing away questions to the sponsors of House Bill 2 to try and get to a point where they could potentially feel good about voting on this. And really, this isn't that surprising for us. We've tried our best to prepare you that this was not going to be a very quick process. There is a lot to get through on this. A lot of Republican and even some Democratic lawmakers aren't quite comfortable with what is in the legislation, and they want to see even more added to it, specifically with public safety, and Chris Ramirez is going to go over the latest on those efforts, of course. You're probably shouting questions at your TV right now like, okay, when's the vote going to happen? We're asking those same questions to our insiders here. Are we going to see a floor vote from the Senate tonight? Could that happen tomorrow? Remember, the Senate is where cannabis died during the 60-day session. So this is really where things have to change in order for the governor's effort to legalize this to move forward any more than what we saw in our regular 60-day session. So that's where we stand at this point. Obviously, a lot had to happen today to get that bill into the Senate. I want to bring in Kai Porter because he was monitoring the efforts in the House earlier today, and we heard some debates and some amendments proposed that didn't sit well with everybody. So Kai, let's get everybody up to speed on what this discussion looked like today. All right, Kai, thank you very much for that wrap up there. So a lot of lawmakers we've talked about this believe that, okay, if we are going to legalize cannabis, then we really need to have a public safety package in all of this, specifically when it comes to finding drugged drivers, punishing drugged drivers. Chris Ramirez has done a great job following that effort during the regular session, the special session. But I mean, that effort went nowhere.
Yeah, it went real south, real fast today. Essentially, that public safety package, it's called House Bill 4, was essentially sent to House Rules. And the House Rules Committee had to make a determination if that was germane to what the governor wanted lawmakers to do during the special session. Germane also means is it relevant? And that committee, mostly made up by Democrats, voted it wasn't. And with that, the public safety package died. In the House Rules Committee, the merits of House Bill 4 were not up for debate.
I think it's novel effort and something to contemplate the policy provisions, but we're not here to discuss that, and I just don't see how it's germane.
They only briefly debated if the public safety package was germane or not, and Democrats, who hold the majority, voted it wasn't. And with that, the bill died.
The recommendation then to the body will not be to recommend that it is germane. Thank you, members of the committee. We stand adjourned.
The public safety package would have allowed blood sampling technicians to testify in court virtually, giving prosecutors around the state more opportunities to get them as expert testimony witnesses. It would have created a metric to set a legal limit for driving while impaired on cannabis, much like what we already have for drinking and driving. And it would have allowed police officers to get warrants to draw blood from more suspected drugged drivers. A blood draw is the only way to check for drugs in the system.
If we're going to legalize marijuana, you have to pass this legislation.
Representative Bill Rehm sponsored the public safety package.
What is most troubling with this is that we're in the process of passing legalized marijuana, but we're not giving law enforcement the tools to deal with the drug driving that will occur.
And there's actually some history with this public safety package. Representative Bill Rehm of Albuquerque actually tried proposing and introducing these ideas not too long ago during the 2021 regular session, which was an appropriate place to do it. those public safety bills immediately died. They got nowhere. They literally died in their first committee hearing. I think if we're hearing Bill Ream's argument, he makes an argument that I think a lot of people can buy into, which is, let's make sure if we legalize recreational marijuana, we are also looking out for the bigger picture of public safety, and his hope is that in 2022, when he brings these ideas back, that perhaps those ideas will get more traction because more people will be aware of how important it is to also think about public safety and think about drug driving in the context of legalizing recreational marijuana.
And we should point out that when we talk about public safety tied into legalizing cannabis, it's not as if the sponsors of the bill haven't thought of that to some degree. They believe their bill goes far enough in public safety realms, but I mean, every time that we talk to Representative Javier Martinez, for example, and he says that if there is a Republican lawmaker around us, I immediately hear under their breath, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. So it's the level to which they believe enough is enough in taking this huge step.
Yeah, I think a bill sponsor generally is a good lawmaker is appreciative of other people's ideas, right? It's not like any one person has a monopoly on all of the good ideas.
Right.
And when you have an entire building of smart, capable people from all walks of life, perhaps you can lean on them for advice. And what we've largely seen, there have been some bipartisan efforts here, but when it comes to legalizing recreational marijuana, we really haven't seen the voices of Republicans being taken very seriously with their ideas. And as we've talked about here before, Democrats have the ability to just win everything because they have the votes, both in the House and in the Senate, and then of course they have the support in the governor's office.
Absolutely. I want to give everybody a live look right now into the Senate chambers, because this is the committee of the whole that we have told you about. This is the process, if you will. A lot of questions coming our way usually. What's taking so long? You're looking at what takes so long. This is important discussion that has to happen because this is a very hefty bill legalizing recreational marijuana in our state. And do you have it pulled up?
Yeah, I'm watching it right here, actually, yeah. So we have Senator Joseph Cervantes of Las Cruces speaking right now.
And you had talked about how, Republicans don't feel like their voices are heard. This is absolutely not a partisan issue.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, there are some Democrats, Senator Cervantes included. We still don't know how they're going to vote on this. This is not a D versus R, very clear-cut issue.
Yeah, there's certainly on the Senate side, more so than on the House side. There are certainly Senate Democrats who are not on board, and we've heard from some of them. And so, the prediction is that when the Senate finally takes a floor vote, it is going to be a really close one.
Very close. Okay. Tommy, we're going to send it back to you. We're still monitoring everything. As soon as there's an update, we'll let you know. We'll absolutely be back here at 6:30.
Tessa, Chris, thank you so much. We want Tessa.
Hi, Tommy. Hi, everybody. So if anything, our jobs got a little simpler today compared to yesterday during the first day of the special session, and that is because House Bill 2, this latest version to legalize cannabis here in New Mexico, is in the Senate. You'll remember back in the 60-day session, that effort passed the House. It was in the Senate where the effort died. So if we can get it through the Senate tonight, tomorrow, that would really basically clear the way to get it to the governor's desk, considering maybe the House doesn't have any huge changes or has any huge problems, I should say, with any changes we could see from the Senate. But that's where we're focusing on tonight. That's where all the magic may happen. We shall see. I want to bring in Kai Porter to better explain what that process looked like today when we had the legislation in the House. There were some things brought up, recommended changes. So, Kai, how are things going? Basically, the nuts and bolts of this legislation and where we stand at this point. Okay, Kai, thank you very much. I want to actually update Kai because as much as we're in here, I mean, things happen at the drop of a dime. The expungement bill that he talked about, essentially this is the companion bill that he mentioned to go along with cannabis to expunge certain misdemeanor level convictions related to marijuana. That's a huge part of the social justice effort to all of this. That bill passed the House. It is now heading to the governor's desk, and that's kind of like the conundrum of this too, Chris, is if that bill passes but we wouldn't pass the cannabis bill, what that would look like. Stay tuned for a later chapter of that saga. But do want to get back to the fact that, yes, this is a drawn-out process, and yes, these are long debates, but they're not, you know, reading messages from their high school yearbooks down there.
Yeah, I think a lot of you at home, we're now on, I don't even know the hour, certainly the second day of talking about the same subject, and so I think a lot of you at home might wonder, why does this take so long? We often have that same question, and what we've been hearing in the Senate, it's some percentage stall tactics, but I think the majority of the questions we're hearing are really thought out questions. Senators really dissecting the bill to make sure that we don't have unintended consequences, or if we can foresee some of those unintended consequences, maybe we can work out some of those nuances or some of those problematic languages in the bill now versus later. So that's my way of saying I don't think it's all stall tactics. No. There is a good percentage of really healthy debate to make sure that New Mexico truly knows what it's getting if and when this is legalized.
And there really are two schools of thought on that, right? That we do have a lot of lawmakers, primarily Republicans, who say it's not ready, we need to add this, we need to have a public safety element. But then on the other side, you have the other school of thought of lawmakers who say, we understand, we can get the framework down now. Nothing is stopping us from coming back in our 2022 session for our 30-day session and tweaking. I mean, we tweak everything every time we have a session. So it's kind of the argument of, do we want to get this as perfect as we can right now, or do we want to just get it done now and make those tweaks as we go down the line? The other big thing that came out today was the amendment that passed in the Senate. There was some chatter about this. You know, a lot of folks wonder why we're pushing this through. Why is this such a priority? And some have raised the question, do any of our lawmakers have a financial stake, a financial interest in legalizing recreational cannabis for their own incentives? And there was an amendment passed bipartisan in the Senate that would essentially ban any lawmaker in our state from applying for one of those licenses to sell legal cannabis until 2026. So yeah, there's a lot happening.
And there's some lighter moments. There was this moment when, in that debate over that amendment, a senator said she didn't have any plans on profiting from cannabis, but she would like to have one plant because the plants are just really pretty.
She's heard that they're gorgeous.
It was a lighter moment.
Yeah,
and so it was something that we needed at the time.
We appreciate those. We appreciate those, and we hope that we can be your light moments in this continuous saga, folks. So, Tommy, we're going to send it back to you. We're going to take a little mental break and catch everybody up for the Night Beat tonight at 10. See where we stand at that point. Huge moment. And you know, there's that popular saying, hurry up and wait. And I always say at the Roundhouse, it's the opposite. It's wait and hurry up. And that's exactly what happened here today. You know, when we checked in with you guys in our earlier newscast, there was still a lot of important debate going on. Let's make that clear. This wasn't about stalling necessarily. These were very important issues for a lot of lawmakers on both sides. And once the senators hashed that all out during the committee and we actually got the cannabis bill to the full Senate for a vote, that happened extremely quickly. From the time the floor was, the session was called in to the time that bill was passed was about 10 minutes. That was it. And so they couldn't get done in a 60-day session. They've been able to do in about, 33 and a half hours, I think I saw is what the official time is on this special session. And we know that the effort to legalize recreational cannabis in our state is not something that popped up in 2021 or this week. This has been something that lawmakers have worked on for quite a few years now. I want to get to Kai Porter because he sat in on that session with us and saw what that moment was like. And also, Kai, you spoke to one of the sponsors of this bill about how it feels to finally get the job. Yep, Kai, you're absolutely right about that. You know, we have talked about how controversial this bill has been, this effort to legalize recreational marijuana in our state. And I don't want to speak for everybody, but I was really caught off guard by one of the messages that we heard on the Senate floor tonight. Some people may call it sour grapes from Republican State Senator Cliff Pirtle. I wouldn't call it that. I think this was a very passionate, emotional, and genuine response about the repercussions that we are going to see, not just because of legalizing recreational cannabis, Chris, but the way in which it happened.
The sentiment that I got from it was that legalizing recreational marijuana for New Mexico came at a cost. There were consequences. There were political consequences. Some Republicans stuck their neck out to help make this happen. They feel like their neck was actually cut off when they put their neck out. We want to play this moment when Senator Cliff Pirtle from the Roswell area spoke to his Senate colleagues. Take a listen and then we'll talk about it.
You know, my biggest fear isn't that we're passing a horrible piece of legislation. I think what's most disappointing to me is the destruction of the legislature that we've witnessed here. The legislature has been destroyed. The legislative process has been destroyed. You know, a buzzword we've been hearing is bullying. And we all know what happened. People were pressured, pushed, pressed, put in a corner to vote a certain way. Why? Because if you don't, we all know what's going to happen.
Immediately after he said that, Tessa and I were sitting next to each other, and I leaned into Tessa and I said, you know, I've seen that too. The end of the 60-day session was really tense. And since we've been up here, there have also been some tense moments. And I think there has just been so much divisiveness about this particular issue because it is so controversial. This is not something that, at least here in this building, everybody is celebrating. Some people had really strong feelings that this just isn't the best route for New Mexico.
Well, and what has Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham always said in her State of the State addresses? She ran on it beyond the educational moonshot, which many would argue she achieved. She has wanted to legalize recreational marijuana, and she was very outspoken when that did not happen in the 60s. She said she does not like to lose. She does not like to hear no. There has been controversy surrounding even calling a special session to do this. Many don't see this as a pressing issue. Obviously, she and many Democratic lawmakers would argue it is because of the economic benefits that we could see out of all of this. But Senator Pirtle had even said at one point, you know, I don't know if it was in that bite, but if this is what the legislature looks like, he doesn't even know if he wants to be a part of it. Now, ultimately, this won't be put into place until I think the deadline's April 2022. So there's still a lot that has to be. This is just the first step, so to speak.
This is just the first step, and hopefully we're not back here either until January of 2022. So certainly a lot of mixed emotions, mixed reviews, probably more happy people than not happy people, but certainly it's mixed.
Yeah, and I know that marijuana was obviously the major focus tonight. There was an expungement of certain criminal records bill that was passed that's heading to the governor's desk. The expansion of our Local Economic Development Act is heading her way as well. So things were accomplished in this special session, and we will just see how all the chips fall once she actually puts pen to paper and makes all of these pieces of legislation law. So you know what? I hope this is the last time we're signing off from a special session in the year 2021. Year, right? Yes. Tommy, we will send it back to you.
Guys, thank you. And speaking of Governor Lujan Grisham,